Ambassador Lee Minute-Ho walked slowly through the massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber. The crystalline walls sparkled with alien light, but today they felt cold and unwelcoming. He had been Earth's representative for 8 years, and every day had been a struggle to make the other species listen to humanity's voice. The chamber buzzed with the sounds of dozens of different alien languages. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their designated areas, some floating in special tanks, others perched on unusual chairs designed for their unique bodies. Minute-Ho took his place in the human section, which was smaller than most others despite humanity's contributions to the council. Today was supposed to be different. Today, humanity had submitted a formal petition for full membership status. For 30 long years, humans had served the Galactic Council faithfully. They had provided the most advanced technology, sent their young people to fight in galactic wars, and solved countless problems that other species could not handle. Human engineers kept the space stations running. Human soldiers protected trade routes from pirates. Human scientists had cured diseases that had plagued alien worlds for centuries. Yet after all this service, humans were still labeled as provisional members. They could attend meetings, they could speak when asked, but they had no vote on important matters. Decisions about war, peace, trade, and galactic law were made without any input from humanity. Minute-Ho straightened his formal diplomatic uniform as Chancellor Coltharas of the Nexian Assembly called the meeting to order. The Chancellor was a tall, insect-like being with multiple arms and compound eyes that never seemed to focus on any one thing for long. His voice came through the universal translators with a buzzing quality that always made Minute-Ho's skin crawl. Today we consider the human petition for full membership, Coltharas announced, though his tone suggested the matter was already decided. Let the record show that humanity requests voting rights and equal representation in this council. Minute-Ho stood to address the assembly. Honored delegates, humanity has served this council with dedication and sacrifice for 3 decades. We have lost millions of our people defending council worlds. Our technology has advanced galactic civilization by centuries. We ask only for what we have earned through our service and our blood. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some were supportive, but many carried the dismissive tone Minute-Ho had heard too often. The Vorthan delegation made clicking sounds that their translator rendered as laughter. The Nexian representatives buzzed among themselves, clearly unimpressed. Delegate Zexmarie of the Helix Federation spoke first. Humans are indeed useful, but usefulness does not equal readiness for full membership. Your species is still young, still learning the ways of galactic civilization. Young? Minute-Ho's voice rose slightly. We have been part of this council for 30 years. Our oldest colonies are now home to third-generation settlers. How much longer must we prove ourselves? More clicking laughter from the Vorthans. Their chief delegate, a massive creature with razor-sharp teeth, leaned forward. Perhaps humans should focus on their current duties rather than seeking advancement they have not earned. Minute-Ho felt his hands clench into fists behind his back, but he kept his voice steady. What duties have we not fulfilled? What service have we denied? Name one crisis where humanity was found wanting. The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then Chancellor Coltharas spoke again. The matter requires further study. We shall postpone this decision for future consideration. Postponed again, Minute-Ho said, his diplomatic training barely keeping his anger in check. This is the 5th time in 3 years you have postponed our petition. Meanwhile, the Kalari Collective was granted full membership after only 10 years, despite contributing far less to council operations. The Chancellor's compound eyes finally fixed on Minute-Ho. The Kalari understand their place in the galactic order. Perhaps humans need more time to learn the same lesson. That was when the emergency alert sounded. Red lights flashed throughout the chamber as urgent messages flooded in from the Outer Rim territories. The Vorthan Empire had launched a massive attack on human colonies in the Tau Ceti system. 3 worlds were under assault, and early reports indicated heavy civilian casualties. Minute-Ho's personal communicator buzzed with desperate messages from the colony governors. Ambassador, they came without warning. Orbital bombardments of civilian centers. We estimate 300,000 dead already, and the attack is still ongoing. He looked up at the assembled delegates, many of whom were reading the same reports on their own devices. The Vorthans have attacked our colonies, he announced. Hundreds of thousands of human civilians are dead or dying as we speak. This is an unprovoked act of aggression against a council member. The Vorthan chief delegate stood slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow across the chamber. The humans were harboring terrorists and weapons smugglers. This was a legitimate police action to maintain order in our sector. Police action. Minutho's voice cracked with disbelief. You bombarded cities full of farmers, teachers, and children. This is genocide, not law enforcement. Chancellor Coltharas raised one of his many arms for silence. This matter requires investigation before any action can be taken. We must hear all sides of this unfortunate incident. Incident? Minutho stared at the Chancellor in horror. 300,000 human beings are dead, and you call it an incident? The Vorthans are full council members, so they get the benefit of investigation while our people lie bleeding in the ruins of their homes. The chamber buzzed with uncomfortable sounds as delegates shifted in their seats. Many avoided looking directly at Minutho, while others whispered among themselves. The council will form an investigation committee, Coltharas declared. Until their report is complete, no further action will be taken. Minutho stood in the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of 30 years of service, 30 years of hoping for acceptance, 30 years of watching his people die for aliens who would never see them as equals. 30 years we have bled for this council, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the crystalline hall. 30 years of being your soldiers, your engineers, your problem solvers. 30 years of treating us as expendable tools while we hoped for respect that would never come. The chamber fell completely silent now. Even the constant background hum of translation devices seemed to pause. No more, Minutho continued. I hereby present the Galactic Council with humanity's final ultimatum. Grant us full membership with voting rights within 72 hours, or the Human Colonial Alliance will sever all ties with this council and withdraw from all agreements and treaties. The alien delegates erupted in chittering, buzzing, and clicking sounds of amusement. Chancellor Coltharas waved a dismissive appendage, his compound eyes reflecting what might have been contempt. Humans are useful servants, ambassador, nothing more. You provide valuable services that benefit the entire galaxy. You will return when the reality of your situation becomes clear. Without the Council's protection and infrastructure, humanity would quickly collapse back into the primitive state from which we elevated you. More laughter rippled through the chamber. The Vorthan delegate bared his razor teeth in what passed for a smile among his species. Perhaps after some time in isolation, humans will remember their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. Minutho looked around the chamber one last time, memorizing the faces of beings he had worked with for years, beings he had once considered colleagues if not friends. Now he saw them clearly for what they truly were. 72 hours, he repeated quietly, then turned and walked toward the chamber doors. The next 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Minutho remained in his diplomatic quarters on Nexus Prime, fielding constant communications from Earth and the colonial governments. The message from home was clear: humanity was united in its decision. They would rather face the unknown dangers of independence than continue accepting second-class status from beings who saw them as expendable. On Earth, President Park Ji-sung addressed the Global Assembly and the billions watching across human space. For too long, we have accepted crumbs from the Council's table while providing them with a feast of our talents and our lives. Today, we choose dignity over servitude. Military commanders across human space received sealed orders. Colonial governors prepared their populations for what might come. In research facilities and shipyards, human scientists and engineers began implementing protocols they had hoped never to use. When the 72-hour deadline arrived, Minutho stood once again in his quarters, looking out at the alien cityscape of Nexus Prime. His quantum communicator was ready, connected to secure channels reaching every human world, every human ship, every human installation across the galaxy. At exactly the appointed hour, he activated the device and spoke a single word into the void: independence. The response was immediate and absolute. Across human space, every council facility went dark simultaneously. Human workers walked away from their posts without explanation. Critical systems that had run smoothly for decades suddenly failed as their human operators vanished. The vast network of hyperspace relays that connected the galaxy began shutting down one by one as human maintenance crews abandoned their duties. On Nexus Prime itself, the massive space station shuddered as life support systems fluctuated. Emergency lights flickered on as backup systems struggled to compensate for the sudden absence of the human engineers who had kept everything running smoothly for years. Minutho packed his few personal belongings and walked to the docking bay where a human transport waited. As he boarded the ship that would take him home, he could hear the growing chaos behind him. Alien voices raised in panic and confusion as they began to realize the scope of what humanity had just done. The galaxy was about to learn what it truly meant to lose the species they had dismissed as mere servants. As the transport ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying Minute-Ho away from Nexus Prime for the last time, he allowed himself a small smile. The real story was just beginning. The first hyperspace relay to fail was in the Kepler sector. Chief Engineer Yaxthal of the Nexian Assembly had been monitoring the massive structure for 12 years, but he had never actually understood how it worked. That knowledge belonged to the human technicians who maintained the complex quantum field generators deep within the relay's core. When the humans vanished, Yaxthal stared at the control panels in growing panic. Warning lights flashed red across every system. The quantum field was collapsing, and he had no idea how to stop it. Within 3 hours, the relay went completely dark, cutting off 17 star systems from the galactic communication network. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On Trade Station Omega 7, Administrator Velkara watched helplessly as the main reactor began overheating. The human engineering crew had simply walked away from their posts, leaving behind equipment that the aliens had never bothered to learn how to operate. The station's 40 million inhabitants faced the terrifying prospect of losing life support. President Park Ji-sung stood before the Global Assembly in Geneva, his face calm but his eyes burning with quiet determination. Behind him, massive screens showed the chaos spreading across council space as human workers abandoned their posts. The assembled representatives from Earth's nations watched in tense silence. For 30 years, we gave them our best, Park began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed assembly hall. Our young men and women died in their wars, fighting battles that were not our own. Our brightest minds solved problems that their civilizations could not handle. Our engineers kept their worlds running while they treated us as nothing more than useful tools. The crowd was absolutely silent now, hanging on every word. Today, we reclaim our dignity, Park declared. Today, we show the galaxy what happens when you take the servants for granted and forget they are the ones who actually know how everything works. The eruption of applause was deafening. Representatives leaped to their feet, cheering and shouting approval. But Park raised his hand for silence, and the hall quickly quieted. Operation Homecoming begins immediately, he announced. Every human citizen in council space will be brought home. Every human asset will be withdrawn. Every piece of human technology will be reclaimed or destroyed to prevent alien access. Across human space, the operation unfolded with military precision. Transport ships that had been positioned in advance swept through council territories, collecting human workers, their families, and any equipment that could be moved. What could not be taken was systematically destroyed. Research data was wiped from computers. Manufacturing templates were deleted. Decades of human innovation vanished in a matter of hours. Captain Lee Sung-minute commanded one of the evacuation fleets in the Vorthan sector. His ships moved from station to station, dock to dock, collecting terrified human families who had lived their entire lives in alien space. Many had never seen Earth, but now they wept with relief as human soldiers escorted them to safety. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving desperate pleas from the Vorthan authorities. They're offering us anything we want if we'll leave some of our engineers behind." "Tell them," Lee said coldly, "that they should have thought of that before they murdered 300,000 of our people." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session on Nexus Prime, but even that was proving difficult. The station systems were failing faster than emergency repairs could be made. Chancellor Coltheras found himself sitting in a chamber with flickering lights and unreliable life support. "This is temporary madness," he declared to the assembled delegates. "The humans will realize they cannot survive without our protection and infrastructure. They will return, and when they do, we will make sure they understand their proper place." But even as he spoke, reports flooded in from across council space. The Meridian Trade Network had collapsed completely. 17 major worlds had lost primary power. The military command structure was in chaos as ships found themselves stranded without human crews to operate their most advanced systems. Delegate Zexmarie of the Helix Federation looked pale and shaken. "Chancellor, 80% of our fleet personnel were human. Our remaining ships can barely maintain orbit, let alone conduct operations." "Then we will show them the price of defiance," Coltheras snapped. "Order the 3rd Nexian Battle Group to Earth. We will demand their immediate surrender and the return of all stolen Council property." Admiral Torvex commanded the battle group that approached the Sol system 3 days later. 15 massive Dreadnought-class warships, each 1 kilometer long and bristling with weapons. He had fought in dozens of campaigns and had never faced a force he could not crush. But as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Mars, Torvex found himself facing something completely unexpected. The Sol Defense Fleet was waiting for them, but these were not the ships he remembered from previous encounters. These human vessels were sleek and deadly, incorporating design elements he had never seen before. Admiral Kim Daeun commanded the human fleet from her flagship, the newly commissioned Incheon. She was a small woman with graying hair, but her voice carried absolute authority as she addressed her officers. All ships, this is Admiral Kim. Today we show the galaxy who we really are. For 30 years, we've hidden our true capabilities behind the mask of helpful servants. Today, the mask comes off. The alien admiral opened communications, expecting the usual human deference. Instead, Kim's face appeared on his screen, her expression cold and determined. Alien vessels, you are trespassing in human space. Turn around and leave immediately. Torvex laughed, the sound coming through the translators as a harsh buzzing. Surrender now, humans, and we may allow your species to survive as slaves rather than face extinction. Kim's response was to close the communication channel and give a single order to her fleet: fire. What followed was not a battle. It was a demonstration. The human ships moved with impossible grace, their weapons cutting through alien shields like paper. Advanced targeting systems, developed in secret over decades, guided projectiles that struck with devastating accuracy. Energy weapons of unknown design carved through alien hulls as if they were made of soft clay. Torvex watched in growing horror as his mighty dreadnoughts were systematically destroyed around him. His own ship's shields collapsed under a barrage of human fire that seemed to come from every direction at once. The last thing he saw was a human missile, no larger than a fighter craft, punching through his flagship's armor and detonating deep within the reactor core. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, 15 burning alien wrecks drifted lifeless in space. Not a single human ship had been seriously damaged. Across the galaxy, the news spread with shocking speed. Species that had dismissed humanity as useful servants watched the battle recordings with growing fear. The humans had not just defeated a major alien fleet, they had annihilated it with casual efficiency. On the Nexian homeworld, military commanders gathered around holographic displays, analyzing the battle footage frame by frame. General Kexthara, the Nexian's top strategic mind, stared at the images in disbelief. These weapons, he whispered. These ships. Where did they come from? This technology is centuries beyond anything in our databases. His aide, a younger officer named Vexcol, ventured a terrifying possibility. Sir, what if they always had this capability? What if they were hiding their true strength all along? The general's compound eyes went wide as the implications sank in. For 30 years, humanity had served the Council faithfully, taking orders, following protocols, seeming to depend on alien technology and protection. But what if it had all been an act? What if the galaxy's most powerful military force had been masquerading as servants while secretly developing weapons that made Council technology look primitive? On Earth, President Park watched the aftermath of the battle from his office in Seoul. The alien fleet was gone, and with it, any illusion that humanity was weak or dependent on Council protection. But he knew this was only the beginning. Sir, his military advisor reported, we're receiving communications from 4 to 7 different species requesting immediate diplomatic contact. They want to discuss trade agreements, defense pacts, and mutual cooperation. Park smiled grimly. Tell them we'll consider their requests once we've finished cleaning up the mess the Council made of the galaxy. In the depths of space, automated human systems continued their work. Emergency beacons guided stranded ships to safe harbor. Medical drones provided aid to worlds suffering from system failures. But now these services came with a price, allegiance to humanity rather than the crumbling Council. The galaxy was learning a harsh lesson. The species they had dismissed as servants had actually been the foundation holding everything together. And now that foundation had not just withdrawn, it had revealed itself to be made of steel and fire. The Council's age was ending. Humanity's time had begun. 6 months after the humans disappeared from Council space, Dr. Veltaran stood in the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's most advanced medical center. The healing spires of Nexus Prime had saved millions of lives over the decades, but now the towering complex was nothing more than a monument to alien helplessness. The diagnostic machines that had once identified diseases in seconds now displayed only error messages in languages the remaining staff could not read. The surgical robots that had performed impossible operations with perfect precision sat motionless, their human programming locked behind codes that no one could break. Even the basic life support systems flickered unpredictably, threatening to fail completely. Veltaran was one of the Nexian's most skilled healers, but his medical knowledge meant nothing when faced with human technology. He stared at a patient dying from a simple bacterial infection that the human-designed treatment pods could have cured in minutes. Now, with the machines silent and useless, he could only watch as another life slipped away. "Doctor," his assistant whispered, "that makes 47 deaths today. The families are gathering outside. They want answers." Veltarin closed his compound eyes in despair. How could he explain that the healers who had saved the galaxy for 30 years had simply walked away, taking their knowledge with them? How could he tell desperate families that the beings they had dismissed as servants had been the only reason their medical miracles were possible? Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On the industrial world of Corax 7, factory complexes that had produced everything from starships to simple household goods stood completely silent. The alien overseers who had managed these facilities for decades discovered that they had never actually understood how anything worked. The real knowledge had belonged to the human technicians who maintained the automated systems. Administrator Jax Keel walked through the massive production halls, listening to the echo of his footsteps in spaces that should have been filled with the sounds of manufacturing. Millions of workers depended on these factories for employment. Billions more across the galaxy relied on their products. Now, with the human engineers gone, even the simplest repairs were impossible. "Sir," one of his subordinates reported nervously, "the workers are demanding their wages, but we haven't produced anything to sell in 4 months. The planetary treasury is completely empty." Jax Keel nodded grimly. He had received similar reports from every industrial center on the planet. Without human expertise, their entire economy had collapsed overnight. Soon, desperate workers would take to the streets, and there would be no council forces available to maintain order. Most of the fleet was still stranded in space, unable to function without human crews. On the Vorthan homeworld, War Commander Thexelar faced an even more immediate crisis. The Empire had been preparing for their largest military campaign ever, planning to conquer the rich Kevri Republic while the galaxy was distracted by the human rebellion. But when his forces tried to deploy their weapons, nothing worked. The plasma cannons that had terrorized Council space for years were completely dead. The targeting systems that had guided their missiles with deadly accuracy displayed only blank screens. Even the basic communication equipment that coordinated their fleets had fallen silent. Every piece of military technology in the Vorthan arsenal had been designed or modified by human engineers, and every single system had been remotely disabled when the humans left. Thexelar stood in his command center, surrounded by dark screens and silent computers. His massive frame shook with rage as he realized the scope of the disaster. The Empire's military might have been nothing more than an illusion, dependent entirely on human knowledge and human systems. "How could this happen?" he roared at his cowering staff. "We are the greatest military power in the galaxy." His intelligence chief, a smaller Vorthan named Kexelar, trembled as he delivered the devastating news. "Sir, our analysts have discovered that 96% of our military technology contains human-designed components. When they activated something called protocol severance, all of our advanced systems were permanently disabled." The war commander's rage turned to cold fear. Without their weapons, the Vorthan Empire was defenseless. Worse, they had many enemies who would be eager for revenge once word of their weakness spread. Despite their desperate situation, the Vorthans decided to proceed with their attack on the Kevri Republic. They would use older, simpler weapons and rely on their natural ferocity to achieve victory. What they didn't know was that the Kevri had spent months studying captured human tactical manuals and battle recordings. The Battle of Kevri Prime became a textbook example of human military strategy used against its former allies. The Kevri forces, led by General Sekthal, employed classic human tactics, feints, ambushes, and coordinated strikes that confused and overwhelmed the Vorthan assault. The Empire's fleet, already crippled by their technological failures, was completely destroyed within hours. Thexelar himself died in the battle, his flagship torn apart by Kevri forces using modified human weapons that still functioned perfectly under alien control. The mighty Vorthan Empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, was shattered in a single day. News of the Vorthan defeat spread quickly, carried by the few remaining communication networks. Other species began to realize that humanity's withdrawal had created opportunities as well as chaos. The old power structures were collapsing, and those quick to adapt human methods might rise to take their place. On Nexus Prime, Chancellor Coltheras faced growing pressure from the remaining council members. Dozens of worlds had declared independence from council authority. Trade had virtually ceased. Even basic interstellar communication was becoming impossible as more relay stations failed. Desperate to find a solution, the Chancellor decided to reach out directly to the human colonies that had not yet been evacuated. Perhaps some of them could be convinced to return, or at least to share their knowledge in exchange for concessions. Captain Yoon Hajin commanded the human settlement on New Busan, a thriving agricultural world that had supplied food to dozens of nearby systems. When the council delegation arrived requesting a meeting, he agreed to see them, but on one condition: the conversation would be broadcast live across the galaxy. The meeting took place in New Busan's simple town hall, a far cry from the ornate chambers of Nexus Prime. Chancellor Coltheras, looking haggard and desperate, sat across from Captain Yoon, whose weathered face showed no sympathy for the alien's plight. "Captain," the Chancellor began, "surely we can reach some accommodation. The galaxy is suffering without human assistance. Perhaps we could offer your colony special status, reduced taxes, even limited voting rights on local matters." Yoon listened patiently, then leaned back in his chair. "Chancellor, do you know what my daughter does for a living?" The alien looked confused by the question. "I'm afraid I don't understand the relevance." "She's a teacher," Yoon interrupted. "She teaches human children about their history. And one of the lessons she teaches is about a time when humans were offered special status and limited rights by beings who considered themselves our superiors." The captain's voice grew harder. "You had 30 years to see us as equals, Chancellor. 30 years to recognize that we were partners, not servants. Instead, you chose to treat us as useful tools. You laughed when we asked for respect. You dismissed our deaths as acceptable losses." Coltheras shifted uncomfortably, aware that billions of beings across the galaxy were watching this exchange. "The past cannot be changed, Captain. But surely we can build a better future." "Now you want to build a better future?" Yoon stood up, his voice rising. "Now that your worlds are dying and your technology is failing? Now that you need us more than we need you?" The captain walked to the window, looking out at the thriving human settlement beyond. "You're right about one thing, Chancellor. We are building a better future. But we're building it without you." He turned back to face the alien delegation. "You see, while you've been struggling to keep your old systems running, we've been creating something entirely new. We call it Project Genesis, the complete redesign of galactic civilization based on cooperation instead of exploitation." Coltheras leaned forward eagerly. "Then you'll help us rebuild? You'll share this new technology?" Yoon's smile was cold. "Oh, we'll share it, Chancellor. But not with the Council. We're sharing it with species that ask for partnership instead of demanding servitude. We're sharing it with worlds that offer equality instead of promising subjugation." The captain gestured to his aide, who activated a holographic display showing star charts. Dozens of systems now glowed with a different color, worlds that had abandoned the Council to join humanity's growing alliance. "The galaxy is learning what cooperation looks like, Chancellor. Real cooperation, between equals. And they are discovering that when you treat people as partners instead of servants, everyone benefits." The meeting ended with no agreement, but its message was clear to everyone watching. Humanity was not coming back to serve the Council. Instead, they were building something better, something that offered hope to species tired of being dominated by the old powers. On Earth, President Park received daily reports about Project Genesis's progress. Human scientists, freed from Council restrictions and bureaucracy, were making breakthrough after breakthrough. New energy systems that made fusion look primitive. Transportation methods that didn't require the old hyperspace network. Communication technologies that could connect the galaxy without centralized control. But the most important development was not technological, it was social. The human approach to governance, based on equality and mutual respect, was proving attractive to species across the galaxy. One by one, worlds were abandoning the Council's hierarchical system in favor of humanity's more democratic model. The collapse of galactic civilization was not just the end of the old order. It was the beginning of something entirely new, something that would reshape the galaxy in ways the Council had never imagined possible. The servants had become the architects of a new age. Retry SF. 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the galaxy itself seemed like a completely different place. Dr. Sarah Kim stood on the observation deck of the research station orbiting New Terra, watching as massive terraforming ships transformed the barren world below into a green paradise. What should have taken centuries was happening in mere months, thanks to breakthrough technologies that the Council had never allowed humans to develop. The transformation was incredible to witness. Atmospheric processes the size of cities worked day and night, converting the thin, toxic air into something humans could breathe. Vast machines scattered seeds and nutrients across the planet's surface, creating forests and grasslands where nothing had grown for billions of years. Ocean generators pumped water from ice asteroids, filling ancient crater beds with seas that sparkled blue under the system's twin suns. The biodiversity readings are off the charts, Dr. Kim's assistant reported, his voice filled with amazement. The new ecosystem is developing faster than our models predicted. At this rate, the planet will be fully habitable in 6 more months. Dr. Kim nodded, but her attention was focused on the stars beyond New Terra. Each point of light represented a world that had chosen to join humanity's growing federation rather than remain loyal to the crumbling council. 300 star systems now flew under the human banner, connected not by the old hyperspace network that was slowly failing across the galaxy, but by humanity's new quantum tunnel technology. The quantum tunnels were perhaps humanity's greatest achievement since independence. Unlike the old council hyperlanes that required massive stations and constant maintenance, the quantum tunnels could be created instantly between any 2 points in space. Ships could travel from Earth to the galaxy's edge in hours rather than months. Communication was instantaneous across the entire human sphere of influence. On the Nexian homeworld, former Chancellor Coltheras sat in the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's seat of power. The magnificent crystal towers of the capital city had gone dark one by one as power systems failed and could not be repaired. Half the planet's population had fled to other worlds, seeking better lives in the Human Federation or in the independent systems that had declared themselves free from Council control. The Council itself had shattered into competing factions months ago. The Helix Federation had declared war on the Meridian Alliance over mining rights in the Outer Rim. The Vorthan Empire was completely gone, destroyed by rebellions on their own worlds after their military collapse. Even the mighty Nexian Assembly, Coltheras' own people, controlled only a fraction of their former territory. Reports reached him daily of entire species going extinct. The Crystalline Collective had died when their environmental systems failed without human maintenance. The gas dwellers of Epsilon Prime had suffocated when their atmospheric processes broke down. The deep swimmers of Aquatica had perished when their ocean purifiers stopped working. 5 entire civilizations had vanished from the galaxy, their billions of years of evolution ended by their dependence on human knowledge they had never bothered to understand. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, "we're receiving distress signals from 47 different systems. Food shortages, power failures, medical emergencies. They're all requesting immediate assistance." Coltheras closed his compound eyes in despair. The Council had no resources left to help anyone. Their fleet was grounded, their treasury was empty, and their expertise had walked away with the humans. He was the leader of a dead civilization, presiding over the collapse of galactic society itself. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Park Ji-sung stood before a massive holographic display in the Global Command Center in Seoul. The display showed the current state of human space, with green dots representing thriving colonies, blue lines indicating quantum tunnel connections, and red zones marking areas where the old council still tried to maintain control. The progress was remarkable. Every human world showed signs of unprecedented prosperity. New agricultural techniques produced food surpluses that fed not just human populations, but millions of alien refugees who had fled the chaos in council space. Advanced manufacturing created goods that were traded across the galaxy, bringing wealth and resources back to human worlds. "Mr. President," his science advisor reported, "Project Genesis Phase 3 is ahead of schedule. Our new energy collectors are producing power levels that exceed our wildest projections. If this continues, we'll have enough energy to support 1 trillion human beings within the next decade." Park nodded with satisfaction. Freed from council regulations and restrictions, human scientists had achieved breakthrough after breakthrough. The fusion reactors that had once seemed like the pinnacle of technology were now obsolete, replaced by energy systems that drew power directly from the quantum fabric of space itself. Medical advances had extended human lifespans and eliminated diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. Even death itself was becoming optional, as advanced life support systems could preserve human consciousness indefinitely. The door to the command center opened, and his aide entered with a worried expression. "Sir, we have a situation. A council delegation has just arrived in the Sol system. They are requesting immediate diplomatic contact." Park turned from the holographic display, his face showing no surprise. He had been expecting this moment for months. "Who leads the delegation?" "Former Chancellor Coltheras himself, sir. His ship is barely holding together. Their life support is failing, and they are requesting emergency assistance just to survive the journey to Earth." The irony was not lost on Park. The beings who had once commanded the galaxy's most powerful fleet now came begging for basic humanitarian aid from the species they had dismissed as servants. But he was not a cruel man, and he would not let even his former oppressors die in space. Grant them emergency support and escort them to Geneva, he ordered. But make sure they see everything on the way down. The Council ship that limped toward Earth was a sorry sight. Once, Coltheras had commanded vessels that could destroy entire worlds. Now he traveled in a craft that leaked atmosphere and suffered constant power failures. Through the cracked viewport, he watched Earth grow larger, and what he saw filled him with awe and terror. Earth was transformed. The planet blazed with light from orbital installations that dwarfed anything the Council had ever built. Massive space elevators stretched from the surface to stations in high orbit. Ships of incredible beauty and obvious power moved through the system in perfect formation. The moon itself had been converted into a fortress, its surface covered with defensive installations and shipyards. But it was not just the military might that impressed him. Everything he saw spoke of a civilization that had advanced beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. The ships were not just powerful, they were elegant. The stations were not just functional, they were beautiful. This was what happened when a species was allowed to reach its full potential without artificial restrictions. The shuttle that brought Coltheras to Earth's surface was itself a marvel. It moved through the atmosphere without any visible propulsion, guided by forces he could not understand. The city of Sol, where he was taken for the meeting, had been completely rebuilt. Towering spires of crystal and metal stretched toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float in midair. Gardens and parks were everywhere, making the urban landscape a fusion of nature and technology. President Park received the delegation in a conference room that overlooked the city. The human leader was older now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes still burned with the determination that had led his species to independence. He sat calmly as Coltheras and his remaining supporters entered the room, their movements weak from the stress of their failing civilization. Mr. President, Coltheras began, his voice barely above a whisper, I come to you with an offer of full partnership. Complete membership in a renewed galactic council. Equal voting rights, shared leadership, anything your people desire. Park listened patiently, then leaned back in his chair. Tell me, Chancellor, what exactly would we be joining? From what I understand, the Council controls perhaps 50 systems now. Your member species are fighting each other over the scraps of their former territories. 5 entire civilizations have gone extinct in the past year alone. The alien delegation shifted uncomfortably, unable to deny the truth of Park's words. The galaxy they had once ruled was indeed dying, consumed by conflicts they could no longer control or resolve. We could rebuild together, Coltheras pleaded. Human knowledge combined with the remaining resources of Council space could restore galactic civilization to its former glory. Park's expression did not change. Its former glory? You mean a civilization where billions of beings lived in fear of their rulers? Where entire species were enslaved or exploited? Where knowledge was hoarded by the powerful while the weak suffered and died? He stood up and walked to the window, gesturing toward the thriving city beyond. We tried to join your club, Chancellor. We offered our service, our knowledge, our lives. In return, you offered us the status of useful servants, to be discarded when we became inconvenient. Park turned back to face the delegation. You're right about one thing, we could help you rebuild. But why would we restore something that was broken from the beginning? Why would we go backwards when we've already built something better? Coltheras's compound eyes reflected desperation. Then what do you propose? Will you simply watch as the galaxy tears itself apart? Park's smile was not unkind, but it was final. The galaxy is not tearing itself apart, Chancellor. It's growing. It's evolving. The old system based on dominance and exploitation is dying, and something new is taking its place. He activated a holographic display that showed the current political map of the galaxy. Green sectors representing the Human Federation covered nearly a third of known space, while smaller independent zones showed dozens of species that had chosen freedom over Council authority. Every day, more worlds choose cooperation over domination. More species choose partnership over servitude. We're not rebuilding the old galaxy, Chancellor. We're creating a new one, based on principles your Council never understood. The meeting ended without agreement, but Park ensured that the delegation was given safe passage back to their dying realm. As their ship departed Earth's orbit, he watched from his office window and felt no satisfaction in their defeat. The collapse of the Council was tragic, but it had been necessary. Sometimes, old systems had to die completely before new ones could be born. The galaxy was indeed changing, and humanity stood at the center of that transformation. They had not conquered through force or achieved dominance through oppression. Instead, they had simply offered something better, and the galaxy was choosing to follow them toward a brighter future. The servants had become the builders of a new age. 5 years had passed since humanity declared independence from the Galactic Council, and Ambassador Lee Minute-Ho barely recognized the galaxy he now served. He stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of New Geneva, watching delegates from 50 different species work together on legislation that would affect billions of lives across the stars. The sight still amazed him, even after all this time. The hall itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Altarian crystal shapers had grown the living walls that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. Kevry architects had designed the flowing curves that made sound carry perfectly to every seat. Human engineers had integrated quantum communication systems that allowed real-time translation between hundreds of languages. It was beautiful not because one species had imposed their vision on the others, but because many minds had worked together to create something none could have achieved alone. Delegate Sekthara of the Kevry Republic was presenting her species' latest breakthrough in medical technology. Her people had taken human genetic research and combined it with their own natural healing abilities to create treatments that could regenerate entire organs in days rather than months. She spoke with confidence and pride, knowing her words carried the same weight as any human representative. The Federation Medical Council requests approval for galaxy-wide distribution of these new techniques, she announced. We estimate this could save 50 million lives per year across all member worlds. Lee Minute-Ho smiled as he watched the other delegates respond. There was no hesitation, no debate about whether non-human research could be trusted. The motion passed unanimously, as most Federation proposals did. When every species was treated as an equal partner, cooperation came naturally. It had not always been this way. In the early days after independence, many species had been suspicious of human intentions. They had lived for so long under the Council's hierarchical system that they found it hard to believe any powerful species would truly share authority with weaker ones. But humanity had proven their sincerity through actions, not words. The first test had come when the Altarian colonies requested protection from Vorthan raiders. The old Council would have sent a military force to establish control over both the attackers and the victims. Instead, the Federation had sent ships to defend the Altarians while simultaneously offering humanitarian aid to Vorthan refugees fleeing their empire's collapse. When the crisis ended, the Federation forces had simply left, asking for nothing in return except friendship. Similar events had played out across the galaxy. Human fleets arrived to help, solved the immediate problem, and then departed without establishing permanent bases or demanding tribute. Slowly, the galaxy began to understand that this new power operated by completely different rules than any they had known before. Outside the assembly hall's massive windows, construction ships worked on humanity's greatest project yet. Unity Station was taking shape in the space between Earth and Mars, a massive complex that would serve as the new galactic capital. But unlike the old Council's Nexus Prime, Unity Station was not built to intimidate or impress. Every species in the Federation had contributed to its design, and every culture was represented in its architecture. The station's central spire was shaped like a DNA helix, symbolizing the way different species could combine their strengths to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Around the spire, living quarters and workspaces were designed to accommodate every form of life in the Federation, from the aquatic chambers needed by the deep swimmers to the low-gravity environments preferred by the crystalline collective survivors. Dr. Park So-young, the chief architect of Unity Station, floated past the assembly hall windows in her construction mech. She was overseeing the installation of the quantum communication array that would connect the station to every world in Federation space. At 68 years old, she was one of the last humans who remembered life under the Council, and she never took for granted the freedom they now enjoyed. Her assistant's voice crackled through the comm system. We're receiving a priority message from the frontier territories. 3 more Council worlds are requesting admission to the Federation. Dr. Park was not surprised. Every month brought similar requests as more species abandoned the dying Council in favor of the Federation's promise of equality and prosperity. The old system of dominance and exploitation was crumbling faster than anyone had predicted. The latest refugees were from the Nexian homeworld itself. Chancellor Coltheras had died 6 months earlier, and his successors were fighting a civil war over the remaining scraps of their empire. Millions of ordinary Nexians, tired of serving corrupt leaders who had driven their civilization to ruin, were fleeing to Federation space in whatever ships they could find. In the assembly hall, Lee Minute-Ho called for order as the day's final session began. The issue before them was whether to accept the Nexian refugees and offer them full citizenship in the Federation. There was some debate, as memories of Council oppression were still fresh in many minds, but the decision was never really in doubt. The Federation was founded on the principle that all sapient beings deserve freedom and dignity, Lee Minute-ho reminded the assembly. We cannot deny these rights to others simply because their leaders once denied them to us. The vote was close but clear. The Nexian refugees would be welcomed and given the same opportunities as any other Federation citizens. It was a decision that would have been impossible under the old council system, where former enemies were treated as permanent threats rather than potential allies. As the assembly session ended, Lee Minute-ho walked through the corridors of New Geneva, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. 5 years ago, he had been a desperate ambassador pleading for basic recognition from beings who saw his species as useful tools. Now he was the Secretary General of a galactic federation that spanned 2/3 of known space. The transformation had not come through conquest or coercion. Humanity had never fired a shot in anger except to defend themselves or their allies. Instead, they had won the galaxy's loyalty by proving that power could be used to uplift rather than dominate, that strength could serve justice rather than self-interest. In his private office, Lee Minute-ho reviewed the latest reports from across Federation space. Agricultural worlds were producing food surpluses that fed billions of beings. Industrial centers were manufacturing goods that raised living standards throughout the galaxy. Research stations were making discoveries that pushed the boundaries of knowledge and possibility. Most importantly, species that had been enemies for millennia were learning to work together as partners and friends. The old Galactic Council still existed, controlling perhaps 100 systems in the galaxy's core regions. But they were irrelevant now, a dying remnant of a failed system. The real government of the galaxy was here in Federation space, where decisions were made by consensus rather than force, where every voice mattered regardless of the speaker's species or power. Through his office window, Lee Minute-ho could see Earth's night sky blazing with activity. Orbital habitats housed millions of humans and their alien friends. Massive shipyards built the vessels that carried Federation citizens to new worlds and new opportunities. Transport ships departed hourly, carrying not just cargo and passengers but also the Federation's most precious export, the idea that different species could live together as equals. The galaxy was healing. Wars that had raged for centuries were ending as former enemies found common ground in Federation membership. Trade was flourishing as artificial barriers fell and resources flowed freely between worlds. Scientific advancement was accelerating as researchers from different species shared their knowledge without restriction. Perhaps most importantly, hope was returning to billions of beings who had lived their entire lives under oppressive systems. Children across the galaxy were growing up believing they could become anything they dreamed of, regardless of their species' traditional role in galactic society. That alone made everything humanity had sacrificed worthwhile. As Lee Minute-ho prepared to leave his office for the evening, he paused at his desk where a simple plaque bore the Federation's founding motto, Unity through diversity, strength through cooperation. Below it was a smaller inscription, added recently by the Assembly, we choose to lift each other up, because we have learned that when everyone rises, everyone wins. Outside, Earth turned slowly in its orbit, no longer just humanity's homeworld but the symbolic heart of a new galactic civilization. The age of dominance and exploitation was ending. The age of cooperation and mutual respect had begun. Humanity had not just survived independence from the Council. They had used their freedom to create something the galaxy had never seen before, a government that served all its people equally, a military that protected rather than conquered, and a society that proved different species could live together not just in peace, but in genuine friendship. The servants had become the teachers, and the galaxy was finally learning what it meant to be free.